In 1603, the English crown passed to a new ruler through proclamations, council oaths, and court rituals, carrying unresolved debts, parliamentary customs, and inherited expectations of authority. The monarchy appeared powerful through royal seals, courts, and proclamations, yet depended heavily on parliamentary subsidies, tax grants, and legal precedent to function beyond ceremony. The king promoted divine right through sermons, printed treatises, and court speeches, framing royal authority as sacred rather than conditional on parliamentary cooperation. This is History and Society, where we explore how systems quietly shape civilizations long before people understood what was happening. Parliament accepted ceremonial loyalty, but defended its privileges through votes, petitions, and recorded debates inside Westminster, quietly resisting any erosion of customary limits. Early sessions revealed tension in practice. Royal requests arrived as written demands for money, while parliamentary responses arrived as conditional grants tied to redress of grievances. Religious insecurity persisted after succession, with church courts, pulpits, and legislation still shaped by fears of Catholic influence within royal households and foreign alliances. The Gunpowder Plot strengthened surveillance, loyalty oaths, and security laws, allowing the crown to justify authority expansion while reinforcing public anxiety rather than trust. By the end of the decade, governance relied on temporary fixes, improvised revenues, and postponed reforms, preserving outward stability while leaving structural conflict unresolved beneath institutions. Royal finances remained unstable, forcing the crown to rely on negotiations, subsidies, and short-term levies debated repeatedly inside parliamentary sessions, rather than fixed institutional revenue. Parliament increasingly framed itself through committees, records, and legal language as guardian of law, not merely a body approving taxation for royal household expenses. Religious tension deepened as sermons, church courts, and printed pamphlets tied Protestant identity to national security and suspicion toward foreign Catholic powers. Court favoritism became visible through royal grants, titles, and monopolies, undermining confidence in decision-making processes that bypassed councils and parliamentary scrutiny. Foreign policy setbacks appeared in treaties, naval expeditions, and diplomatic correspondence, damaging credibility while producing no structural reform inside government institutions. Political language hardened in speeches and petitions, where compromise was increasingly treated as weakness and disagreement as disloyalty rather than constitutional debate. The heir absorbed kingship through court education, sermons, and household discipline, learning certainty and obedience while avoiding parliamentary bargaining and procedural restraint. By the early 1620s, unresolved disputes accumulated in records, memories, and precedents, leaving succession burdened by expectation, mistrust, and institutional fatigue. In 1625, Charles III began his reign through proclamations, oaths, and court ceremonies, inheriting parliamentary disputes, unpaid debts, and unresolved expectations, rather than offering constitutional settlement. Charles I treated obedience as a duty confirmed by royal proclamations, council authority, and inherited theory, not as a condition shaped through negotiation with Parliament. His temperament favored certainty, expressed through firm instructions, written orders, and controlled court access, leaving little space for procedural compromise or shared decision-making. War preparations against Spain appeared in naval commissions, supply contracts, and funding requests, immediately testing relations between Charles I and parliamentary finance. Parliament responded with conditional subsidies recorded in bills and debates, demanding accountability and redress before granting money for war or royal expenditure. Charles III dissolved Parliament using proclamations and council warrants, ending sessions abruptly rather than extending negotiation through established parliamentary process. Marriage to a Catholic princess was announced through treaties and court ceremony, intensifying religious anxiety already visible in sermons, pamphlets, and parliamentary speech. The reign entered public life defensively, with Charles I asserting authority through documents and institutions, while trust weakened before coronation ritual could stabilize power. In 1625, Charles I began his reign through proclamations, oaths, and court ceremonies, inheriting parliamentary disputes, unpaid debts, and unresolved expectations, rather than offering constitutional settlement. Charles I treated obedience as a duty confirmed by royal proclamations, council authority, and inherited theory, not as a condition shaped through negotiation with Parliament. His temperament favored certainty, expressed through firm instructions or written orders and controlled court access, leaving little space for procedural compromise or shared decision-making. War preparations against Spain appeared in naval commissions, supply contracts, and funding requests, immediately testing relations between Charles I and parliamentary finance. Parliament responded with conditional subsidies recorded in bills and debates, demanding accountability and redress before granting money for war or royal expenditure. Charles I dissolved Parliament using proclamations and council warrants, ending sessions abruptly rather than extending negotiation through established parliamentary process. Marriage to a Catholic princess was announced through treaties and court ceremony, intensifying religious anxiety already visible in sermons, pamphlets, and parliamentary speech. The reign entered public life defensively, with Charles I asserting authority through documents and institutions, while trust weakened before coronation ritual could stabilize power. After the coronation, Charles demanded revenue through forced loans issued by council orders, bypassing parliamentary subsidies and relying on administrative compliance rather than consent. Local officials enforced loan collection using warrants in prisons, turning tax resistance by gentry into a visible challenge recorded in court proceedings and petitions. Parliament answered with the Petition of Right, a written document asserting legal limits on taxation, imprisonment, and martial law grounded in precedent and statute. Charles III accepted the petition through formal assent, yet continued governance practices that ignored its intent, preserving authority while hollowing legal trust. Parliamentary debates hardened as journals, speeches, and votes reflected suspicion that royal promises no longer matched administrative behavior. In 1629, Charles III dissolved Parliament again by proclamation, closing the chamber doors and ending institutional dialogue rather than resolving constitutional conflict. Personal rule emerged not through reform but through absence, leaving unresolved disputes embedded in law, finance, and memory. By this point, authority functioned through offices and orders, while legitimacy steadily drained from the institutions meant to sustain it. From 1629 onward, Charles I governed without Parliament, relying on royal prerogative exercised through councils, courts, and written orders rather than representative assemblies. Revenue was raised through revived medieval levies and fiscal devices, justified by legal opinions issued from royal courts and administrative offices. Ship money expanded through writs sent to counties, transforming an emergency levy into a regular tax collected by sheriffs and recorded in local accounts. Court judgments upheld collection, yet compliance reflected obligation and fear rather than political agreement or shared constitutional purpose. Religious uniformity was enforced through church courts, episcopal authority, and revised prayer practices, increasing suspicion towards centralized control. Opposition remained muted in petitions and correspondence, as public silence replaced cooperation within political institutions. Governance continued through paperwork, officials, and enforcement, while trust quietly eroded beneath stable administrative routines. The crown appeared orderly on paper, but ruled without the consent structures that once balanced authority and obedience. Religious reforms were extended into Scotland through new prayer books, episcopal directives, and royal orders, altering church practice without local consent or parliamentary involvement. Scottish congregations resisted through petitions, assemblies, and covenant documents, transforming disputes over worship into organized political opposition recorded across kirk institutions. Royal authority responded through military commissions, supply warrants, and troop musters, shifting conflict from church courts into armed enforcement. War preparation exposed financial limits, forcing Charles III to summon Parliament after years of governing through councils, courts, and administrative orders. The short Parliament convened in Westminster, filling records with grievances, speeches, and constitutional demands before addressing subsidies for war. Charles I dissolved the assembly by proclamation within weeks, repeating established patterns of avoidance rather than institutional settlement. Military campaigns faltered as unpaid soldiers, weak logistics, and disorganized command appeared in muster rolls and correspondence. By 1640, church reform, military failure, and parliamentary resistance converged into open, systemic confrontation. The Long Parliament assembled at Westminster with crowded benches, written journals, and standing committees carrying accumulated grievances from years of personal rule and administrative enforcement. Members moved rapidly, using bills, impeachments, and statutes to dismantle prerogative courts, emergency taxes, and fiscal practices associated with royal governance. Senior royal ministers were targeted through formal parliamentary procedure, signaling a shift from negotiation toward legal accountability enforced through institutional process. Charles I observed authority moving as control over taxation, militia organization, and administration passed from royal councils into parliamentary committees and ordinances. Tension peaked when Charles I entered the Commons chamber seeking arrests, violating parliamentary privilege grounded in precedent, custom, and recorded constitutional practice. The failed arrests destroyed remaining trust, transforming procedural conflict into an open rupture between Crown authority and parliamentary legitimacy. Charles I withdrew from London, leaving proclamations unanswered as political authority split between court centres and the parliamentary capital. By 1642, rival administrations, armed musters, and competing legal claims made civil war unavoidable within the institutions of the English state. Civil war began in 1642 as royal commissions and parliamentary ordinances raised rival armies, dividing counties, militias, and administrative authority across England's established institutions. Both sides claimed legality through proclamations, declarations, and printed laws, turning legitimacy into a weapon alongside muskets, cavalry, and fortified towns. Royal authority relied on personal loyalty expressed through nobles, regional governors, and traditional command structures, rather than centralized parliamentary administration. Parliament organized war through committees, taxation systems, and standardized supply chains, gradually building institutional capacity while fighting continued. Battles exposed imbalance as parliamentary forces improved discipline, command structure, and coordination through standing armies and regular pay systems. Military defeat weakened royal leverage, reducing Charles III's authority within councils, negotiations, and diplomatic correspondence. Sacred kingship lost credibility as defeat accumulated in battle reports, surrender terms, and occupied royal strongholds. By 1646, Charles III surrendered, ending active royal command while leaving the constitutional conflict unresolved. After surrender, Charles III was held under guard, moved between residences, and surrounded by negotiations conducted through committees, written proposals, and guarded correspondence rather than restored authority. Talks failed as the king used messages, promises, and delays, convincing officers and politicians that compromise threatened stability inside army councils and parliamentary chambers. Power shifted again when army leaders asserted control through councils of officers, petitions, and purges, reshaping Parliament itself through force and procedural exclusion. A high court was created by ordinance, using legal forms, benches, clerks, and indictments to redefine kingship as an accountable office. The trial proceeded through charges, witness statements, and recorded sessions, breaking the tradition that royal authority stood above courts and written law. On 30th of January 1649, execution followed formal judgment, scaffold procedure, and public proclamation, ending sacred monarchy through administrative and legal process. The crown survived as an object, symbol, and institution, but divine kingship collapsed under documents, votes, and collective authority. What began with coronation ritual ended with paperwork and force, proving the system could crown a king, but not preserve unquestioned rule.